Around 10 years ago, my friends and I used to mess around at an abandoned winterized house in Mason, New Hampshire. This place was pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors close by and dirt roads were the only way to get to it. The place was pretty cool, but it had been abandoned since 2005 according to all the boxes and papers that we had found. There was some Latin writing and a pentagram drawn inside the sunroom, and snake paintings on the wall. The rest of the house was pretty normal, besides obviously having been picked through. The bedrooms and the living room, though, were a huge mess. That's one of the reasons why we liked going there, because it was private and we could go through all the stuff. There was always a negative feeling surrounding the area though, and nothing ever happened. Until one day. My friends and I ventured into the basement and there were metal chains, the kind that you strap your wrists into and have your hands hang over your head. There was a dark brown stain on the floor under it, tons of chemical bottles, odd glasses, and other weird stuff on a workbench near the chains. All of a sudden, I got this very bad feeling, telling me to get out. Get out. I told my friends I just had a bad feeling and I was going to step outside. I quickly ran up the stairs, sprinted through the home, and went out the front door. I was just walking around outside waiting for my friends to come up when I got this feeling that something was watching me. I looked around the wooded area and then glanced up at the house. A white face was staring at me from the top window. Me being me, I freaked out, screamed, and ran into the woods. I was gone for maybe 30 seconds before I gained my composure and walked back to the house. I glanced back up to that window and the face was gone. My friends came up shortly after and asked me what was wrong, so I told them. They decided to go up and break the window, which I didn't condone, but I didn't want to cause any more problems. I just let it happen. We hung outside for another hour and went to get into my car to leave, but it wouldn't start. I tried to start it multiple times, but it wouldn't even turn over. None of my lights came on, so obviously I had a dead battery. However, I didn't leave any of my lights on, or the key in the ignition. We ended up sitting near my car while it was getting dark, trying to get through to someone so we could get picked up. One of my friends came up to me and told me to look into the top left window and asked me if I see anything in there. So I looked, and I kid you not, there were these huge, faint, but dark red eyes just floating there, slightly moving back and forth like whatever it was breathing heavily. I told him what I saw, and he said that he thought he was going crazy. We continued looking at the house while our other friends were trying to get service, and the thing never moved away from the window. About 30 minutes later, one of our friends came to pick us up, and we pushed my car down to the lake about 5 minutes deeper into the woods. There was absolutely no service in that area, which is why we hadn't moved my car yet. The road was all downhill, so my car was able to move easily. One of the main reasons we moved it so fast was that if the police stopped by for whatever reason, they wouldn't get me for trespassing or anything like that, and so that a tow truck could find my car. I had my car towed to the shop the next morning, so they could get me a new battery. They called me and told me something that made my heart drop, and I never went back to the house after this. Both of the fuse boxes in my car were blown. They had to replace all the fuses, and no one could figure out anything wrong with it besides that. I knew it was the negative entity that did it, but obviously I wasn't going to tell that to the shop. I have always been able to feel entities. I can walk into a house and be able to feel if it's haunted or not, and I can also feel people's emotions. A couple months later, my friend happened to send me a photo of the house, and there were two little shadows in one of the side windows. We think they were children. There was also a black box they had found and burned. He told me it was full of awful kid stuff, and that's why they burned it. I can't go into detail here, but my friend thinks that whoever owned the house was doing some horrible things to the kids. These have been real photos of the house. This last photo, I've had checked by a couple people and they say they see something evil in it. That photo was taken right before I was told to get out. My oldest sister and her husband moved into an apartment that was originally a large old Victorian house in Concord, New Hampshire. I was about 14 at the time. My sister wanted me to see her new apartment and spend the weekend with her since her husband was going hunting with his father and friends. She always hated being alone, Her and I had always been close and I missed her, so I agreed, excited to spend the weekend catching up and being silly. She picked me up after work and we spent the evening in her small one-bedroom apartment with a galley kitchen, a tiny living room where you could only fit a love seat, and a TV on top of a chair. There wasn't even room for a kitchen table. We had stayed up late and I could tell as the night went on that something was bothering her and she wanted to tell me something. I didn't want to ruin her weekend and felt that if I gave her time, she would tell me. She reluctantly said she couldn't keep her eyes open and needed to sleep. I was okay with that, so I spread out my sleeping bag, which took up the floor space in the living room. I lived in Canterbury, New Hampshire at the time, where there were no streetlights, so it was hard for me to fall asleep because it all seemed so bright. After some time, I could hear my sister breathing in her room. She was asleep. My eyelids gave in and I don't remember dozing off. Suddenly, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They seemed to be coming from outside her apartment door. But I figured they were headed to the other apartment on this floor. They woke me up because I lived in the woods and was not used to all the sound that came with living in an apartment. I closed my eyes and felt something walk over to me. At first, I thought it was my sister heading to the bathroom, but I could still hear her breathing in her room. Just then, it sounded like something sat on the couch. I opened my eyes to see a black lab lying on the sofa. I was confused. My sister didn't have any pets at the time. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but the dog was laying there on the couch with his face looking down at me and wagging his tail. I love animals, so I have no idea why I never reached my hand out to try and pet it, but I didn't. Just then, I heard more footsteps at my sister's front door. I sat up thinking maybe her husband decided not to spend the weekend hunting after all, but there was no knock, no key sound to unlock the door. You could just see shadows of feet under it. I just sat there. I didn't know what to do, and I don't know if I was scared or bewildered. The dog jumped down and sat by the door, not making a sound. I could see the door handle shake like someone was trying to open it. At that point, I became scared. The dog looked back at me with loving eyes, and that took my fear away. Then I heard footsteps going away from the door. I felt relieved. I laid back down thinking someone might have had the wrong apartment. The dog then came to lay at my feet. I could feel him there after I laid back down. In the morning, I got up and used the bathroom. My sister must have gotten up when I was in there because she was making coffee and getting things out of the fridge for breakfast. I asked who the dog was. She said, "What dog?" I said the black lab that was lying on the couch. My sister said she didn't know anyone with the black lab. I told her about the door, and she looked at me concerned. She said she had been experiencing the same thing on and off since she moved in. When she asked the landlord about the other apartment on her floor, her landlord said it wasn't rented out. It was a studio apartment, and she was not sure if it needed to be remodeled first. Not to mention, to get into the main door of the apartments, you need a key. My sister went downstairs after breakfast and spoke to her neighbors. All of them experienced the same thing I did the night before, and have ever since they moved in. The locks for the main door had also been changed several times. No one knows who or what is trying to get into their apartments. This was during a time when there was no internet, so I researched at the library about the spiritual meaning of black labs. Supposedly, it means that they are protecting whomever they show themselves to. So, was the figure on the other side of the door an actual person or not? And did this lab show up to protect me? I've told this story to a few people, including my mom and my boyfriend, but until now I've mostly kept it to myself. I'm a 23-year-old female, and when I was around 5 or 6, my dad bought his first house after we had been living in an apartment for most of my young life. When we moved in, things were mostly normal. The house would creak, but since it was newly built, my dad chalked it up to being settling noises. It had no history, and we were the first family to move in there. I used to be fairly scared of paranormal and demonic instances. I had had a few of them in my life previously, and I also had anxiety starting from a very young age. So any strange noises in the house would tip me off and I'd become so scared that I'd have to go to my dad's bed to sleep. My dad obliged, until my stepmom moved in. She felt it was time I needed to learn self-soothing and stop climbing into their bed whenever I got scared. Fast forward a few years, I was 8 or 9, and on this specific night, something extremely scary happened. The worst part is, I don't even remember it. My parents still swear to this day that it happened, and are equally as puzzled as me having no recollection of it. What I remember is sleeping on my stomach, waking up at night, and having no idea what time it was. I then heard 2 very distinct growling noises from under my bed. It wasn't like a dog growl or a human faking a growl. It was very primal, deep, and menacing to say the least. For further clarification, we had no pets at this time. There's no way it could have been a dog. But for some reason, in my sleepy state, I fell back asleep almost immediately. That's all I remember, the growling and falling back asleep. It's weird for me to think about, because I know if I was conscious in that moment, I would have at the very least sat up and screamed. I was an easily scared child, and still am as an adult. The next thing I remember is waking up in my parents' bed, and sitting up not knowing how I got there, especially since they always kept their door locked at night. Immediately, they both sat up with me as if they were only lightly sleeping, and asked me if I was okay. I told them I was confused and tired. I apologized for somehow finding my way into their bed and started to walk back to my bedroom. My dad made me stop and turn around so he could look at the back of my leg. I let him, and I remember him touching my leg and being confused and silent. I asked what was wrong, and they told me that the night before, around 3 a.m., I woke up screaming and practically broke their door down, banging on it and asking to be let inside. Being parents, they of course immediately knew something was wrong and opened the door without hesitation. My dad told me I clung to him, still screaming and crying that there was a demon under my bed and it scratched me. I told him my leg was burning and insisted something had hurt me. He turned the lights on, and sure enough, both of them recall seeing a very distinct set of scratches on my leg, spaced like human fingers, not like a cat scratch or a scrape from something. These were intentional, red, raised scratches. My dad said he immediately investigated, but couldn't find anything. He looked under the bed with a flashlight, opened my closet, even walked around the outside of the house. There was nothing. The doors had been locked, and so were my windows. They let me sleep in their bed because I was understandably inconsolable, and they didn't want me to sleep alone after that anyways. After I had woken up and my dad made me turn around to check my leg, the scratches were gone. There was nothing there. Nothing to prove anything happened. It still shocks me to this day to think that I don't remember a single moment except for waking up and hearing the growling. Like somehow it has been deleted from my memory. It could have been traumatic enough that I blocked it out, but immediately? Like the very next day? You could say I was just an anxious child with nightmares. But with both of my parents insisting it happened, I can't just downplay it and dismiss it. It's a truly unexplainable event in my life.